Hi everyone, my name is Maisa Rissi and I am PM on Microsoft Graph Developer Experience team focused on Graph SDKs. I'm going to talk about the Microsoft Graph.net SDK, highlighting some of the new features and improvements in the V4. And Andrew is going to be doing a demo for us to show how you can take advantage of these new features. So we recently announced the general availability of V4, but to keep the speed short, since we don't have an endless time here, we had select some major updates to highlight in this call, but we'll soon share the link to the blog post that contains all the information you might need. So this new version of the SDK now takes advantage of the Azure Identity to improve the authentication experience, providing support for interactive browser credential, which Andrew is going to show in the demo in a few minutes. And also client certificate credential, device code credential, and many others that you can find examples on how to quickly set up through the upgrade guide. We also moved from newtonsoft.json to the system.text.json since the last one is faster in serialization and deserialization. This new library focuses primarily on performance, security, and standards compliance. So the SDK exposed the inbuilt serializer with the appropriate configuration. So you can use the serialize object and deserialize object methods for serialization to and deserialization from JSON. Microsoft Graph allows apps to subscribe to change notifications for resources, saving the subscriber from having to call back to fetch the changed resource. So to provide a better experience, the SDK now includes native support for to decrypt the resource data in breach notifications payload. So you can count on functions such as air tokens valid or decrypt async to validate the token and decrypt content in the notification payload. We also did a bunch of cleaning. So for example, the SDK now also produces the graph response object, giving easier access to response information like headers and status codes, removing this information from the additional data property, allowing users to have a better experience and better performance during the deserialization of the response payload. The data type is no longer specified by default, so preventing users from having to performance workarounds for some scenarios where the API is not expecting this information. So now the property is only set in cases where type disambiguation is required. Still on the cleanup subject, the iGraph Service Client interface has been removed. We know it has been used to build application tests that depend on Graph Service Client class by users. However, this would cause code breaks whenever the Microsoft Graph metadata changes, making it less than ideal for mocking and inheriting. Thinking on it, properties and methods of Graph Service Client class have been made virtual, allowing mocking frameworks to override them. And last but not least, here are some of the major fixes included in this version. So beta and V1 libraries can now be used side by side in application. The page iterator has been moved to the core library, making it accessible through both libraries. And we added support to read stream responses in batch requests. To support all these new features and improve the development experience provided by the SDK, the minimum version of the .NET standard is now 2.0, and the .NET framework bumped to 4.6.2. As I mentioned before, you can access the blog post through aka.ms/ga-.NET v4 to have access to detailed information about the .NET SDK v4 and find important links such as the upgrade guide, where you can see all the updates for this new version, include those mentioned here and others, and which improvements are considered as a break change and which are not. So let's get straight over to a demo. Now I hand to Andrew, and he's going to show you some of these new features. Take it away, Andrew.
Hey everyone. Yeah, my name is Andrew, and I'm a developer from the Graph DevX team. So I'm just going to spend some time to demo some of the stuff that we've been trying to add and release in the new version of the SDK. The first thing I'm going to start talking about is really the authentication. So we've added support with regards to using token credentials from the Azure Identity packages. So typically someone who is working from the Azure SDK as well can typically use the token credentials and just plug them into the SDK. And that also makes the setup of everything way easier since you don't really have to worry about the MSAL configurations. Like in this scenario, we want to do an interactive browser token acquisition, and you would just pass in the client ID into the options, create an interactive browser credential, and then pass it over directly to the Graph service client. And this would now help you be able to authenticate and be able to acquire tokens. So like for us to quickly run this, it would just like pop up the whole browser login window, and then I would be able to get back a Graph service client that has the tokens, a valid token for this. Yeah, and now the next thing maybe I would probably move on to is to talk about the serialization and the serialization work that we've done with regards to moving from Newtonsoft to system.txt.json. And a lot of that work is happening internally. And we've noticed that a number of SDK users did also have like a Newtonsoft specific code to serialize and deserialize payloads. And with regards to that, we encourage guys to sort of like use the wrapper methods and that we have exposed with regards to the serialize object and the deserialize object. So using them directly will create a serializer that is pre-configured to enable everyone to be able to do the work in the correct way without having to worry about whether you've made the appropriate configurations with regards to sending data to the graph and back from the graph. So the other thing is really that the properties in the additional data right now, you will notice that they are now of the type JSON element. So I remember with Newtonsoft, you would do like automatic casting and you would just cast the object to a string and whatnot. But since the JSON element from system.txt is really abstract and the whole boxing and unboxing business gets a bit tricky, you would find yourself having to write a statement like this to like sort of get the string out of the object in the additional data bug. The other thing is the other thing is now you won't find the headers and status information, just as Maisa had mentioned before. So that really is covered by the next feature that I was going to talk about. And this is with regards to the graph response. So the graph response really is a way to help users have more power and more control over how they want to handle their responses and data from the graph. So traditionally, you would find users like making a call to the graph with a statement that looks like this, where you would call the getAsync method. So with the graph response object, what we've done is for every getAsync method or postAsync method or updateAsync method, we now have another parallel method called like a getResponseAsync method. And what this does, it returns like a wrapper object, and the wrapper object is what we call the graph response object. And the graph response object will expose the headers, the content, and also the status code. And since this is now exposed, when you deserialize, when you make the native call before with the getAsync, you won't necessarily find the header and the status info in the payload. So and once you get the graph response object, you can now get the native object that you want. Like in this scenario, you want the user from the user response object. You can call the get response object async, and then it'll now call the serializer and give you back the user object. And with all this now, this enables you to make checks and write your code in the way you want it, because now you can validate whether the status code is as you expected or not. And then the other advantage is that you would find that since you had like the status info, the status code info, and the header info in the additional data object, if you try to modify a property and try to post the same object back to the graph, that would throw errors, and that would force users every time they want to update something, have to create a new object and post that. But now, since there's no headers and status code info in the object coming back, you can actually modify the same object and send it back to the API. So other than that, there are other things, as Maisa has mentioned, where you can use the page iterator both in core, both in V1 and both in beta. And also, we have sorted a lot of issues with regards to using V1 and beta in the same project. I think that's it from me.
Excellent. Right on time as well. Really cool to see the great improvements to make it easier. And that's a really good point as well, that you can use the same data object for updating information. So that's going to help a lot on making the code much cleaner. And again, just a reminder, https akmsga.net v4 is the AKMS address for that one. So to get more details on it.